Shalom. I hope all's well. It's not going to be such a long live stream, but had some time and had some thoughts on Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan and some commentary on stuff on this little corner. Also, just going to discuss a little, if someone wants to, what happened in Israel recently. The terror attack that was here, but no pressure, obviously, if no one wants to get too political. So I'm here right now. If anyone wants to jump on and discuss, feel free. I don't know if people in this little corner saw the Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson podcast, but definitely recommended. It was very, very good. Joe Rogan didn't say much, just Jordan Peterson was really streamrolling, but it was fascinating. Sorry about that. Okay, so what I was going to mention about the terror attack that happened in Israel, which was devastating. What was specifically devastating is there was two different attacks. There was one by a synagogue where seven people were killed, and then there was another one by the old city of Jerusalem, and the terrorist. I didn't feel comfortable saying terrorist, but the terrorist was 13 years old. That is very, very young. And people are jumping on to immediately on the bandwagon of punishing his parents. They should be deported. His house was closed up. And I just don't think that is the proper response, however devastating it is. Obviously, there needs to be some sort of response. But the response to a 13-year-old doing such an act needs to be a much greater response. And it's very unfortunate to see the kind of literature that the literature that they have in their schools teaching what they're teaching these kids and the syllabus they have, and it's so shocking. And seemingly the world is quiet about these things. And again, I'm not blaming the students, the children. I don't even know if I could blame the parents necessarily. I mean, obviously they're adults, but and I don't know if it's demeaning to say that so many of them are really brainwashed due to a tremendous amount of propaganda. But it is such a difficult problem. It related to something Jacob was also talking with Paul, but before I go down that lane, it really seems that you have a whole generation of people that already from birth are being told that they need to hate the other and kill the other. And this is woven into, again, school textbooks. So, figure out the trajectory of the stone you're throwing at the driving car, and how one should execute a bus bombing, and or celebrating bus bombings and celebrating horrible acts of murder, and these things are already taught to children in school. And again, I'm not, I don't sort of know what to expect then from a 13-year-old boy that writes to his mother that he's dying as a martyr, and he's wants to be celebrated as a hero. I juxtapose. If you think about that in what's happening in the States when there's a shooting, many times it's an example of an incel or someone very troubled. And isn't necessarily troubled youth, where I would say that there's some sort of chemical issue, a misbalance, or there's a mental issue. Rather, they are zealots. They are thinking that this is what God wants from them. And again, there could be being brainwashed, but this is all through the prism of some holy war. And that sounds bad when I said some holy war. Their holy war. But it's difficult to know what Israel needs to do in response, because a military action, who are you pointing the finger at? And I'm sure there's blame to go around, but rest assured, you can be rest assured that no one in Israel is teaching math using the amount of dead Zionists or dead Jews you have, and no one is teaching kids to kill or hate, but there is only talk of love and understanding. And while it is true that in the Jewish community, and specifically in the religious community, there are some groups that have racist opinions and racist attitudes and rhetoric towards Arabs, that is a very while loud, still small minority, and it is still light years away from the kind of message and rhetoric that they preach. There could be conversation about deportation, or that this is the enemy, and you could say that from using such rhetoric, it could lead to hate speech. But real hate speech that that people sort of complain about in the States, real hate speech looks like teaching kids to call out to the death of Jews, teaching kids to look at all the citizens of Israel as the enemy. That is hate speech. That's hate teach. And I don't even know if the buck stops at the school. Obviously, who's funding the school? But I don't know how we escape this vicious cycle if it's so ingrained into the youth. It's sort of, you have to outlive a whole generation. I've said before that Israel should be, as part of PR, just investing a tremendous amount of money. I mean, I'm not saying they should drop ideas like Iron Dome, because obviously they're necessary, but they should also, hand in hand, be investing in tremendous amount of infrastructure with regards to schools in the disputed territories, which obviously is very difficult. I know that's like a naive answer, but it has to be come from an educational place, which brings me to sort of the conversation Jacob was having with Paul and some few others. I think John Van Donk was on it as well, and they were discussing Paul. Jacob was in classic Jacob form, complaining about Christianity, but more specifically about some of the rhetoric people use with regards to excuse me, I see I might have forgotten the link also, so I wasn't looking at the chats. Excuse me for a moment as I How rude of me. Paste. All right. The link is posted as well if someone wants to join. Okay, I see some conversation. Hello. Yeah, so Jacob was talking to Paul, and I believe he was talking about if the belief of, in sort of in believing in Christ being redeeming of sins, and that sort of being a bad habit because one lacks the sense of responsibility, in a nutshell. And everyone answered Jacob that while that is the rhetoric you hear, that isn't necessarily what they believe or what they think most people believe. But this goes back to, and obviously this is very different. I'm not saying this is terror in any way, of course, and this is true also in the Jewish tradition. The dogma we teach, and while sometimes we feel comfortable in sort of our own setting to be like, well, we know that that's dogma, and we know that there's the underlining ideas, and there's different ways of interpretation. That's not what the kids hear, and that's not what the kids see necessarily. And we clearly talk about this as a society, but we do take it for granted how much they absorb from what we teach and what we say, and they should. Obviously, we're very specific about it as we indoctrinate our kids. And I know indoctrinate is a dirty word, but we do so whether in any religion. And so we could come and say that, as Jews, we don't really believe, obviously, in genocide. At the same token, we have to explain the Amalekites. We have to explain how we're dealing with that. And if Christians want to teach their kids or publicly or in sermons have specific ideas, if that's what the community is taking and they're only taking it at this level, and it doesn't really help them that there's this little corner where you could learn and interpret and understand, because out there in the real world, terms are being used and being gobbled up and understood as is by many people. And whether it's a naive person not necessarily fully exploring their relationship with God, to someone thinking that God is demanding him to kill another person. And those things are devastating. And it requires us to be a lot more careful with the words we use and how we teach and what we teach. Society is it's like a very thin veneer of proper and social, or I would just say proper behavior. And you create a corona, or you add some hate, or you stress a difference, and very, very quickly you could reach the very ugly nature of humans. And it seems like in the West, we all have our more enlightened attitude. However, there are some that have not reformed themselves that way, both from a religious perspective and a social perspective. And society can't ignore that forever. Hey, Pick. I agree that there's a bunch of factors. I agree. I would just, again, like, you could project and you could listen to whatever suits you. However, even if I'm projecting or if I'm trying to convey a message of why I think, so to speak, Judaism is a good path to take, the language I use is not to necessarily exclude or to demean the other, and that relates to a different conversation that Sam was having on his fantastic podcast or channel called Transfigured, and he was talking to Beth El, and I'm forgetting the other guy's name, but they were doing some commentary on, I think actually, yeah, commentary on Paul Vanderklee's commentary on the Hoover Institute conversation with Charles Murray and the Dominion guy. I'm blanking on the name right now, and Myers, the scientist. Yes, and there was also a question over there, which is, how much can you skirt the truth? At some point, you could speak about these concepts like as metaphor, but there are other people that are having this conversation and are not having it in a metaphorical sense. When they say, don't draw how our prophet looks, and if you do, you're taking a chance that you might get killed. That's very intense. Good afternoon or good morning for you, Charlie. Good evening for me. Yes, that is correct. All right, I really only have like half an hour left on this. Again, anyone's welcome to jump on. And how this relates to I just mentioned this earlier on, how to the Jordan Peterson conversation. I don't know if you guys saw Jordan Peterson on Rogan, but wow. Oh, Chad.
What's up, buddy?
Hey, man.
How are you?
Good. I was trying to do some weaving over here. I was talking about the situation that happened in Israel over the weekend, alongside Jordan Peterson's conversation with Joe Rogan, and some of the conversations Sam was having with Beth El on his channel. So I was trying to spin some plates and see how these things intertwine. But
I stepped in possibly at the wrong time then.
I'm sorry?
I might have stepped in at the wrong time then. I didn't want to derail your train of thought there. I wasn't actually...
It's all good. Jordan was trying to, and very ambitiously so, was basically saying, I'm going to build this alternative mindset. And I'm going to do so. I've been on the road, basically. I've been listening to what people have been saying, speaking to me as, the order master. And I've been listening to them and collecting my thoughts. And at the same time, I'm walking alongside my guide, Jonathan Peugeot, right? Which in our little corner, we know is being influenced also by Vervaeke and also by Paul. But, he's clearly basing his whole move on the biblical corpus, on the biblical story.
Yeah.
And that is just fascinating. It's beautiful to see. It's very ambitious, and he didn't really let Joe speak much, but he was making sense. Like, I was nervous a little, like, I think Joe had this with Neil deGrasse Tyson that wouldn't stop talking, and you as an audience, you get like secondhand embarrassment. You know what I mean? You get cringy when you see that. Yeah. But here it was sort of like Joe masterfully was sort of like letting him speak. He was like, the guy came with something to preach.
Mm-hmm.
But why that resonated and sort of resonated again, there was an excitement in his eye, or at least that I felt, that he believes us. Like, he is like, I
after my first biblical series and now my second biblical series. And like, I'm literally like, I'm clothed in my armor of like chaos. And he has like his, all his suits. Like, he is manifesting in his, I don't want to say his final form, but like Paul talks about it, like the waves. I don't know. I think like this conversation should be dubbed like the new wave. I guess this is like wave 3. It's like wave 3 starts now, because like I think we're seeing like this version of him right now. There was like the crying version of him that we read like towards the end. So while he's saying this, and I'm like, wow, like he is coming with this new energy, and you could see how infectious it was, how like, he empowers religion, or religion is empowering him and he is re-empowering religion. Then I zoom out and I look at the conversation. Sam was doing commentary on Paul's commentary on Douglas Murray having this conversation about religion. Yeah. And Beth L and Sam and their friend over there were discussing like maybe Jonathan Pizzo's metaphorical conversation, and that relates to Jordan Peterson's like scientific conversation, a psychological conversation. Like, I'm going to bring you religion repackaged, not necessarily as like, as God, or, as whether it's, Yahweh or whether it's Jesus, but more like, psychological, metaphorical package. And there's something so beautiful about that. But Sam was saying how, at the end, should we push for like a real conversation, which is like, did someone come out of that grave, or like, what did they see on Sinai? And I'm looping it back around to, in Israel, there was again, unfortunately, a horrible terror attack, and there was 2 in 24 in like less than 24 hours, but the second one was a 13-year-old boy, and he shot these people right next to where my son goes to school, and he also takes this very seriously, and he also takes like what his teachers are telling him about the religion and why we're here and why this fight, and he's taking it so seriously, and it's very different. Like, that kid picked up the gun in a certain sense, I think was different than like the 14-year-old kid picking up a gun and shooting up in school in the States. He is doing this from like this, religious, excitement, and the same energy the teachers are tapping into to teach this kid this horrible rhetoric, where they see his school, his school books are like teaching him like, how to kill and how to hate, which is horrible that they have it like woven in. Jordan is using that same power to like, preach on Joe Rogan and like talk, speak the gospel and like, have a revolution. And it's so sad for me how within 24 hours I can like, the spoken word, and like there's like so much life into it. And the same point, like the spoken word, and there's like so much death associated with it. That's the end of my rant.
Yeah, there's a lot of convergence. I think, well, first of all, I think Peterson's on the crest of the third wave. So we're not at the beginning. I think we're right where it's going to start to break, because I think the college of psychologists thing is interesting. I think it's going to do wonders for the Peterson movement, and they think that they're going to make an example out of him, while it's actually going to be the other way around, I think.
So sorry, go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
Well, I just think that's interesting, because I think a lot of new eyes are going to see something that they haven't seen before. In how far I have gone in the Peterson-Rogan conversation, I'm right at the point where he starts to talk about this new initiative that's kind of the counter to the WEF, and he's talking about getting a bunch of different people together. Basically, I thought it sounded like fill out surveys and give ideas about a different narrative. That was interesting. I do believe and will always believe, at least up to this point, that Peterson has some very strong values and beliefs that he it will not make public, and for good reason. But a lot of people in the corner think like, well, he's not a real believer, but I would say like he probably is. He just there's good reason why he isn't saying certain things out loud. There's good utility in that, and then the comment you made, as soon as I read about what happened in your region, I thought about you, and I was wondering if you were okay. And then I knew that we couldn't really communicate because I thought you were on, I think, Shabbat or something like that. And so I was thinking about you, but and then the comment you made though just now about how the school shooter in America is very different than the school shooter that you're talking about. And I don't think there is a big difference at all, actually. I think there's a lot of underlying mix-up that goes on in the spirit of a person when they're captured by particular egregores or spirits or voices that kids take things very hard. This is actually a big part of what Peterson was talking about like the psychological contagions and epidemics and things like this. And this is why I just think it's so valuable that we work diligently at love and seeing each other regardless of our differences. So I know that sounds very hippie-ish, but I think that there's something very serious about that. Hey, Lance, good to see you. And the ones that need to be shown what love is are the ones that will be carrying the weight of tomorrow. And I know all of this sounds very hippie-ish, but
I appreciate it. I want to say three things, and then, well, before I say those three things, first of all, Lance, you're doing well. Family's doing well. Thank God. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. First, just with regards to Jordan, well, two things regards to Jordan. One is, Lance, we were saying how I think this is like Jordan's like third wave right now, like after this conversation with Joe. And Abraham's called Avraham HaIvri, the Hebrew. And the Ivri means he is me'ever, he's a cross. And everyone was on one side and he was on the other. And he is the remnant, he's coming out of the Tower of Babel. So when I see, like, this also is like a Kairos moment, like when Elon Musk buys Twitter, right? So the psychologists coming out to Jordan and saying, like, we're not taking away your license, but basically their whole process of their disciplinary hearing and his re-education, there is, like, you could see the full crack. You could see, like, the tower has fallen. No one's speaking the same language anymore. When, like, and I always use this example of in the dictionary, the word today literally also means figuratively. So, like, once society got to that point, like, and now Jordan has gone me'ever. He's gone, I would say, the Hebrew route. He's gone to the other side, and he's doing, like, his thing. So that's just, like, again, what I'm seeing there, like, on that end symbolically. I saw Mark was mentioning, hello, Mark, I hope all's well as well. He's saying that I'm misunderstanding Peterson entirely. Perhaps we're seeing him differently. Perhaps the language I'm using is improper. And I would just say maybe I'm misunderstanding him, but this is just what I'm seeing from him. And as far as the shooter, Chad, so first of all, I'm no expert on, obviously, the literature. I'm sure there are underlining similarities due to depression and anger and many things like that are similar. However, one potentially is coming from a place of not necessarily. Sometimes it could be despair. Sometimes it could be from them seeing themselves like as the hero, as the martyr, which it's less about suddenly, like, what's going through this 14-year-old kid's brain. Is he depressed, or is something like pushed him over the edge? I don't think the parents or the school is teaching the child. And I'm saying, as a society, you could be like, we're asking a lot from young children, and we're demanding too much. So yes, that could be causing social pressures, but I don't think you have schools telling kids, like, become, like, let's celebrate the school shooters. And here, this kid is the model he's being told is, this is to be celebrated. So hence my problem. And
Well, there are two sides of one coin. One side, where the place you live, it may be as a result of too much of a skewed foundation, and then on our side, there's somebody who's living on a house with no foundation. And I think that's what's happened. I think in the West, it's a place of a crumbled foundation. And that's what I mean. I think they are both very religious problems in a weird sense. I think it's a result of the waters we live in. They're not. I don't know. I'm not getting that idea across very well, but
I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and then, like, the thing I think I'm seeing in Peterson, and what I saw for a long time, this goes back to the question I asked you about what are the similarities between Peterson and Socrates, and will Peterson drink the hemlock? I mean, I think that's what he's doing right now. Yeah, one thing Peterson has been willing to do, I think, since he saw a place that he could be of use, was, well, nobody else is going to walk it and step off the ledge, so I'm going to show you how to do it, because you won't do it. And so he, in doing that, he shows how to be strong and how to be principled on some probably some universal principles of being upright. So that's what I see. I mean, because, like, and I constantly see him wrestling with God. That's what he's doing in the eyes of the public. And I don't think it's an act. I think he's really doing that. And there's a courage about that. I mean, I think when I'm sitting in my church a couple weeks ago, my pastor comes up to me and asks me, have you heard of Jordan Peterson and blah blah blah?
Right.
Like, and then I have to tell my pastor, well, I actually wouldn't be in this church if it wasn't for Peterson. Well, I'm one of many. I'm sure of this. And so I think that's interesting. He has a very, very poignant role to play, and he's doing it well. And it's a lot of weight to carry, probably. But so I'm enough. I can't stay long, but I wanted to say hello. And
yeah, I'm also, like, I think, like, in 10 minutes or so, I got to bust out. Lance, take it away.
No, I just got done watching that Joe Rogan interview, and so I saw you guys were talking. It was a tour de force. I mean, he has spent all this time thinking about these, and like Paul mentioned, that Jordan looked as strong as he's ever seen him when he saw him live, right? He has been wrestling in these ideas. He's been in this crucible since 2016, right? Thinking, meeting his own crisis and everything else, but to come out and, everything he touched on, like, he was speaking about the danger of anonymity and the self-censorship, and get yourself prepared to speak out, right? Because a lot of, speaking to that deal that a lot of people say, well, I can't use my real name because I'll get fired. Well, that's starting that totalitarian self-censorship, right? And so he's got this whole framework, and as he laid that out, and then he gets into our gender crisis that is going on, particularly amidst our young women. And at this point of confusion, some people want to rush in to affirm that. It's like, and this happened in my own home, by the way. And my response was to tell her that I'd love her forever and ever and amen. And I told my wife, we're just going to back off and just let her see through it. By the way, she's come out on the other side, and she's getting close to getting married to a young man. Okay. So, But this, and he mentioned that, which is, just kind of let them go. But how we're preying on these young women right now, right? At this very vulnerable time of this natural thing. And he went through it, cognitively and scientifically. Then he gets into using the biblical thing, and Paul was all over this on Twitter. My gosh, the audaciousness of what he's trying to get out and do using the biblical model about organizing. A lot of people want to criticize people, and he's talking about the clinical coming after him because his tweets. Listen, if you have a problem with the way Jordan Peterson's, and I always say, look at yourself. What's your own motive? What's your problem? This man is out here, even if he's speaking the way you don't like. Are you a free speech person or not? Are you willing for people to say the things that challenge and do it? And when he talked about it, just the things that the tweets that really bother people. Oh, I hate when Jordan's tweeting. There's a depth behind what he's doing on that platform. So I think it's also open your eyes up. And so, here's this guy, and people have a lot of critiques about Jordan. Well, I wish he wouldn't do this. I wish he'd just talk about the Bible. Man, this guy is a prophet. He is here. He is a man for a moment. And what he's trying to set up, instead of just complaining about it, a lot of people can point to problems. Who's getting off their behind with the solution? This man is trying to bring together a global solution. And a lot of people say, well, what's Jordan doing? Like, what's he doing with this? And like you said it, Chad, that he's cresting the third wave. He's building it. And he's going to build it at a global level by organizing the people with real power and real influence, right? Instead of just a few people trying to get together to do things. So we have to do our shares, like in our communities, build our squares, our communities. He's talking about start with yourself, start with your wife, start with your family, start with your community, then maybe your state, whatever that might be. So yes, we all start right where we're at. But thank God we have Jordan Peterson out here. I'm just telling you, like, Paul was blown away by that.
Where did Paul do this?
On Twitter. I posted them in the Voxer. He just talked about what he's done. But I mean, that was literally a tour de force. Unbelievable.
And do you agree? I mentioned this earlier. I was just wondering. I think it was like Joe was being quiet because he was just like taking it all in.
Dude, could you imagine all that coming at you? I mean, and Joe likes to listen, and like I think when he knows he's got someone, and they're in their flow mode and they're disseminating, and I think Joe was just. Could you imagine being, because he's not a part of like a lot of that, we're primed for those conversations in this little corner of the internet. But could you imagine the fire hose?
Well, I assume
coming at Joe.
I assume by now he knew what he knew what to expect a little, right? But I mean, it's also going to be funny, like what you'll see on Spotify, like what the next podcast is. I don't know, like some guy or something, like some random thing or something that's going to be like a completely different change. But it was really fascinating. It was very, very enjoyable to see, and he seemed. It wasn't manic. He seemed like just invigorated.
Yeah, he was on point.
That's pretty typical of Peterson Rogan conversations, though. Rogan, in their conversations, typically is doing a lot less talking than Peterson. So
the first two is like more Rogan was getting his like mind blown by like all these like stats.
Yeah.
That, like he's like that was the one when he came back recently. When like he's wearing the tuxedo, that was like not a great conversation.
No,
I think like he was still angry. He's sort of like all over the place. Like I wasn't loving that. And I also think he seemed like Rogan seemed confused. Here again, there was like Lance was saying, there was a flow to it where he was just like going from topic to topic to topic as they're talking about like, him watching Tammy close up a story. He's like closing up like this whole story on like 4 years worth of like conversation. So it was like very meta, and but he was in it. And I agree with Paul, like him basing this on like the biblical was what to me was like so amazing, because like again on the public stage he's he's preaching God. And this relates to Mark, if he's still listening. Mark was mentioning over here that it's crisis of faith versus crisis, meaning crisis, different entirely. So I've heard her talk about this before, and I heard her talk about that people that the religious folk have some sort of structure, so like they're at a potentially better place than people without that. I know they could both be different things. However, ultimately, I think faith undergirds meaning in a certain extent, and people having like a meaning crisis, they could call it a meaning crisis, but there are faith elements to that.
100%. I agree, Chezi. Yeah, I don't think they're different. I mean, we can get into a little definitional. Well, I define it this way and this way. Okay, fine. But there is absolutely connection and overlap in it. I get what Mark's going to get at, how he talks about that, and he's going to want to define it this way and that way. But I think when you step into any meaning, I think part of stepping out of the crisis into some sense of stability, you're going to be stepping into some I don't know. Okay, it is not all, you know what I mean? And like, I think Zevi will get into this stuff really well on his channel, right? Like, I think part of faith and part of stepping out of the meaning crisis is I do think you step into a bit of an unknown, but then there becomes there's some stability in that, right? And when I tie the faith and meaning.
And I think, yeah. What is faith? What am I supposed to do with faith? And I think for me, the great gift of faith is the ability to hopefully see others and to see God. And not do that, I can't. I'm going to find it very difficult to find meaning. And so that's, for me, that's what all this is about. That's why all the different talks about all the different crises and stuff, it's like, well, clearly we're having difficulty defining and all of that. So I think we're really having difficulty seeing each other. And I think this place is what's that's the real fruit of this, of the corner, is practicing trying to see each other, even if we don't agree. In fact, seeing each other regardless of, almost in spite of if we agree or not.
I think what Jordan Peterson does through his 12 rules, so this would be a 12-step. How do you step into a faith in a 12-step? Or I think it's also how you would see it in, I think Judaism, how you would see it in Christendom, but how you would see it in Jordan Peterson is you got to get into a practice. You got to be a doer. Don't just be a hearer, be a doer. You need to start moving and embodying. And those are the things that are going to get you out of the meaning crisis. And those are the things that are going to build your faith. So it is a program of action. It's a movement towards, like he's talking about, towards the highest possible good, right? Towards whatever this transcendent thing is. But it's not through thinking. It's not through ideas. That's whatever it is. It's going to be through action that you're going to break yourself into meaning, or you're going to enter into meaning, or you're going to enter into faith.
So I hear what you're saying, and my question then is, we use words like orienting us and the proper way how to live our life and clean your room, but what Sam was talking about on his podcast with Bat-El and the conversation with Douglas Murray, which is there's a big positive of talking about it in this language, which I said, this language sort of allowed us to skip Sam Harris. Using this beautiful metaphorical psychological language allowed us to be sort of wrap ourselves in this cloak of scientism in a certain extent, and be okay, this is a safe space again where we could play these ideas. The question is, at some point, do you then again need to, where the rubber hits the road, what are you actually talking about? How far are you going to be able to even ride that wave of talking, I live as if I live as if God exists, or these are the things I do because and Jonathan Peugeot is the one that talks about this the most, right? That plays around sort of like with these, with the, like, likes using his metaphors, but and Mark was mentioning that, like, Jordan has tools. He doesn't necessarily have a thesis. If he has a thesis, he would have been a religion. But how much of Jordan's tools are actually tools that he's taking out of like his religious toolkit and using them sort of to try and patch and fix the world? And if you're going to do that, how long can you say, oh, it's because of the psychological good that you're getting out of it? Now, we could all say, like, that's great. We all see the psychological good, but is that psychological good tethered to the ultimate good, to God, and obviously these conversations happen over here. But, there's the version that Joe is selling to the world on Joe Rogan, where he doesn't have to constantly be talking, let's say, about God. But then there's also a question, like in this little corner, which is, like, does that do any damage of Jordan packaging that way? Does that make any sense? Like, are you in some way, are you, people saying, like, are you smuggling Jesus? So like, it's like almost like the opposite in a certain extent. Like, I'm smuggling in narrative, or I'm smuggling in like, I don't want to say psychology, but I'm smuggling in scientism in a certain extent to sort of keep things at bay. And I wonder if for people that's going to suffice, or that also, like, I don't know if that itself is sturdy enough. That needs to be that, and like, that's great for me as a religious person. I love having that in my toolkit, but I still don't know if that's enough to necessarily, quote unquote, change the world. But
what's the toolkit for?
What's the toolkit for? Well, I mean, we use some of the terms when I hear Jordan Peterson talking about, his mission. When I usually talk about Judaism, I talk about Judaism is an operating system. Mm-hmm. And it offers an operating system for one to live his life in a certain way, to orient himself, properly as an individual, family, community, group, nation. And, I've said this before, but and if one does so properly, yes, there are details, but then that goes into kindergarten teacher, student, helper, plumber, taxes, everything. Everything has that same spirit going through it. Now Jordan's coming in, like, sort of reinstituting some of these things and saying, like, stand up straight, clean your room. What are narratives? What is identity? What is personhood? Because we sort of need to relearn all these things, sort of, that people were more used to embodying and living. And, like, Grizz talks about this on his channel about, like, remember, embody. But it's sort of just that. It's remember to embody that, because everyone's sort of walking around with slogans and ideas and things that have been regurgitated on TV and then turned into a hook to sell to you, and they sort of lack any substance. And even if you do have substance, it's sort of substance that you sort of fill in with a text. But
Paul said something on Friday. He said Peterson brought up responsibility, and he said it's an interesting word because it comes from the word to respond. And so for me, a simple answer to what's the toolkit for, it's to have the ability to respond, not to react, but to respond properly to the life that you're living in. It's relational. It's not sitting in a room in a vacuum by myself. The point I'm getting at is the toolkit is for us to share. That's it.
Yeah, and I was thinking, Chad, I thought you were going to go there. I was curious what you were going to say, and I want to make sure I'm tracking you, Chezi. But, from my perspective, like in a 12-step environment, a 12-step fellowship, right? We talk a lot more about spiritual principles, okay? And these spiritual principles that exist within AA, we're taken from, we're taken, quite frankly, from the Judeo-Christian tradition, right?
What a surprise.
But it's through these principles you learn how to live your life, right? And so there are these tools, but there are these principles, and we claim spiritual. We claim that we live by these principles, okay? And these principles orient you to yourself, to God, and to others. right? And how you would organize yourself. And so by that way, it can be agnostic. And I know that drives a lot of people crazy, but like if you would go watch Zevi's 9-minute clip or whatever it was when he finally kind of saw what he was seeing in that, I mean, you do not have to be afraid from that. And so when I see what I would see what Jordan's trying to do, and I'm in Chad's camp now. He can do whatever he wants. Jordan needs to do whatever he wants. But I think him not coming out and proclaiming, yep, I've joined this church and I'm a Christian now, and I'm Orthodox or I'm Catholic or I'm Lutheran or I'm Reformed. I wish he would keep that so it doesn't get mixed up in it. Because see, the folks in Alcoholics Anonymous realized as soon as you get some naming of it, you exclude all these other people. And they took that out of it, and it allowed people across the globe to come together and live these principles and have this unity that's existed. And so, I see him when and again, I've been watching the Exodus series too. I know a lot of people didn't want to get behind the paywall, and I thought it was worth it. Watching all these different people think about these things and grab these principles, and to watch him pull it out. Well, a cognitive scientist and Jung and Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, and he's grabbing all of these things that can be global, universal. Hey, God, there are these principles, folks, and if we grab these principles and we live by them individually and in our families and with others, and for some of us it'll be whatever you're going to say is God, right? That those are the things that will organize us. And so I just see him, and Chad, correct me if I'm wrong, I see what he's trying to do. It looks very, hey, we're going to come about these traditions and these guiding principles and the realities about how to live life that function at the lowest level up to the highest level, and we're going to try and do that across, kind of on a global scale. What do you think about that, Chad?
Yeah, because I think so. There's a solution in there that we just mentioned. There's something like a universal solution, something like that. But in order to know what that is, you have to know what I think the universal trouble is. And the universal trouble is selfishness and self-centeredness. It's really it. I mean, I think that's the thing that's separating each of us. Because, like, at any time that I've ever found myself in any kind of real position of torment or anger or resentment or fear, it's always, if I'm honest with myself, it's rooted in self-centeredness.
Right. And Jordan was all over that.
Yeah.
Chad Neckall talking about the devouring mother, the Malthusian, talking about the narcissism, seeing how this is playing out, and even in the gender crisis and all of these other sorts of things that we see coming in here. What we are at a crisisness of self-centeredness,
yes,
selfishness, and this sense that we are disconnected from others and disconnected from God and others.
Which is the self-centeredness. Now, like, the thing about saying selfish or self-centeredness, usually people hear a pejorative, and I'm like, no, I'm just talking about a simple fact. Like the 13-year-old girl who is terrified of her new puberty and terrified of being on the outside, terrified of not fitting in, can't discern what's going on with her. All of that is a self-centeredness. That doesn't mean she's bad or evil. It just means she's caught in the throes of self-centeredness. And so then what's the solution to that? And it would be the opposite. That's what I found. It's the opposite of the thing that's killing me, which is self-centeredness, is God-centeredness or other-centeredness, which are very much kind of very close to the same thing. Because
that's the problem. I'll be honest with you. That's the problem of the feminist middle-aged woman. They're angry. They have no kids. Their only focus is they've lost this connection with themselves and others, and I think deep down they've missed the whole meaning of life. And so they have their time. So their religion, their sense has to be tied up in this ideology that they are, and they will devour. These university professors, and Jordan talked about this. they don't have kids, so they're infantilizing the student body, and they're devouring the kids, and that leads to I'm not saying all of it, but it's a major problem. We've gotten misordered.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, Chad, do you have? Can you play around with StreamYard, or are you not an admin or whatever?
I don't have those capabilities, and I have to actually get back. I only stepped out for a smoke break. My wife and I are watching Better Call Saul, and we're on like episode 5 of season 6, and so we're excited about that. But I appreciate you taking the time, and I hope to talk to you that stuff with Billy, talking about the traditions. I'd like to talk to you about that, hear your thoughts on it. And,
I'm sorry. What did you say?
I sent you a video with that
Yeah,
guy.
yeah. I mean, him talking about all the different chapters. I mean, there's a whole about the final decision, how the board makes decisions. It was fascinating. But yeah, we'll discuss.
Yep.
Yeah. And one of the things that we'll get to this sometime is you have time to think about what Jordan was talking about. I've been really curious, as you've been talking about, really what the Jewish state is trying to look around at the other nations and trying to figure out a way. Well, how do we model, right? Because I think what Jordan's doing. I was thinking about you, Chezi, as you were thinking like, yes, like what the best vision of what Israel or would be the example to the nations, being in tune to them. But how do we embody this? How do we embody this Mosaic principle, right? And live it out. And then, so I just saw what he was trying to do. I'm like, in the best sense, and I know it's very hard politically right now. You've talked about this. There is not unity amongst Jewish people of what the Jewish state should be or whatever. But I think, like, to me, what he's talking about, I hope he has some Jewish leaders that have the capability to have some say-so, right, as a part of that, because that would be very interesting.
I definitely agree. Unfortunately, I mean, even right now, even Israel's response to what happened recently, I don't know what the proper response is. Maybe, the proper response is to show understanding, and then like that's extremely difficult to show understanding. Like I don't know what the world needs to see. Part of me thinks like the world sees Israel defend itself. That's bad. A part of me sees Israel, even if Israel's response would have been like apologizing and building a school, they might be like they're weak. It's very difficult to sort of know how, and you want to follow your own truth, but Israel needs to also define for itself what are its own values, and it has to do with its own version of its meaning crisis. How does the population see itself? Why are we even here? And it's sort of, people can have that conversation of like, from a nihilistic perspective, what are we doing in the world? But if you're living in the promised land, but you don't believe in the promised people, and you don't believe in why the land is yours, and you don't believe in the narrative, then like, yeah, it starts becoming very awkward for you to start being in a place where you're quote unquote occupying others and dealing with like what's going on in the world. And you have to sort of square that for yourself. Like, okay, if I'm going to now arrest this child, why am I doing this? Why am I here? Big questions.
Yeah, well, there'll be a lot. There's a lot, and this is just initial stuff. There's going to be a lot to unpack out of that, and Jordan's going to keep talking about it. So there's going to be a lot for us to talk about and think about and contemplate. That's, I think, bubbling up right now. I think Paul will talk about it. I think you'll be talking about it. People in our little corner will definitely be talking about it. Looks like Jordan's going to have people globally talking about it. It's going to be a really interesting time.
We're definitely in exciting times right now, and I'm happy I'm along for the ride.
So my response would be is let's let Zevi contemplate what Israel should do for about 10 days, and then we'll do whatever Zevi wants.
Right, his offices are almost done. He'll be back soon. We'll talk.
See you.
Bye all. Mark, thank you so much for contributing as always. Thank you all of you for contributing. Pick and D-Dod and the rest of you over here. I'm Breen Jat. Yes.